Hello, welcome back. In the last video we did some wheel bearing and kingpin lift checks, and in this video we're going to take the wheels off and have a good look, do some checking, do some measuring and an adjustment. In an inspection or service inspection, you're looking for defects and things that could affect the vehicle's handling or anything that's damaged. Right, well sometimes you can't always see the wood for the trees. In a snapshot with the wheels off, can you see a problem? Perhaps this could give you a hint as well. Or just to put you out of your misery, I'll show you. The drag link here is bent. Not too much of an issue, but it would be better if it was straight. Right, now you've got the wheels off, you can check the brakes, the disc, the backing plate, the flexi hoses, which are here, and the other brake pipes for corrosion. You also have your suspension parts freely visible, and you can go ahead and check to see whether the shock absorber bushes are worn, or the shock absorber or damper is leaking. Also to see if the springs are broken, because sometimes they are, and you can't always tell, not without a visual check. We also want to be making sure, like the rear axle, that the springs are retained correctly. Anyway, I'm going to show you this bush here. This is the bottom bush of the damper or shock absorber. You can see that it is loose, quite considerably loose, and it has been moving as well. You can see the amount of lift on that. And if you look at the spring seat, you can also see where the bush has been wearing. The shock absorber and spring turret should be secure with the bolts. Spring should be in good condition, not sagging or broken. Checking the chassis around as well. The bump stop, which you can't, if you can just see that, you can hardly see it. This also gives you an opportunity to check the condition of the chassis. Drive flange should have all the bolts in place and tight. You can usually tell if they're loose, and there shouldn't be any leaks. Alright, check the studs for any wear or damage. A good point is to look for swarf from the wheel nut. If there is, then you'll have to look a bit further. Land Rover data state that the brake discs only have permissible 1mm wear on either side of the disc face before it gets to the maximum wear. Okay, I've got a set of calipers here to measure them with, and these are okay. This will measure. Remember at school or mech tech, always zero in a set of calipers before you use them, and then you'll get an accurate measurement. We're looking at the disc here. It's measuring at about 19.5. Okay, so on these vented discs we're looking at about 2 to 3 mil of wear beyond the limit. Okay, we also have an inspection of brake pads here, and the brake pads themselves are actually loose in the caliper, and they chatter a little bit when you put the brakes on. Shouldn't really be like that, and the pads themselves look quite low as well. What I'm looking for is the wear in the pins, if the caliper's loose or not, and any leak of hydraulic fluid. Pins should really be free, and you should make sure that the retainers are still there, and also the anti-rattle springs. Land Rover recommend that the pads be changed when they're at 3mm, which is the minimum friction material thickness that you can have on a pad. I would change them at 6mm on each pad. The reason being is that pads like this, if they get overheated, they break up, as you can see here, and that's about 3mm. What we're looking at is changing the pads before you lose the material. Now these have been overheated, so they don't have as much braking efficiency. Whereas you see here, you've got about 4mm on either side. Taking into consideration the fact that the discs are also worn, these pads are actually thinner than what they first appear. Also, checking out in places that you wouldn't normally consider, especially these brake pipes, you can see if you move the axle onto full lock, the brake pipe is touching. I wouldn't consider this very safe at all, as the pipe will chafe and eventually wear through. It's also an MOT failure. Right, so flexi pipes, you check the condition of them to see if there's any blistering or cracks. If there is, then change them. Now, there is a test that you can do which involves your assistant putting the foot on the brake again, and don't you just love her shoes, And what you're looking for is any bulges in the structure of the flexi pipe. If there is, then change it immediately. Another little gem that we found is that tyres are rubbing on the radius arms on both sides, and one worse than the other. You can see this by putting it on full lock and turning the wheel just up there. Checking the criteria on the MOT tester's manual, a tyre fouling a part of the vehicle is reason for rejection, which means no fresh MOT certificate. Generally on these sort of axles you'll have a stop lock, which does as it says, it stops the lock from going any further. Now this bolt is adjustable. As you wind it out, it reduces the amount of lock you have on one side. So if we're adjusting the passenger side or near side stop lock outwards, then what we're going to see is a reduction in the lock on the driver's side or offside. And vice versa, when you adjust the offside or driver's side, you will reduce the lock on the near side or passenger side. Right, well these bolts actually have a lock nut which hold the backing plate on. You can see here. You can undo them first of all, and they shouldn't be too much of a problem. And then after then you can wind on your stop lock until it doesn't scuff. Same on the other side. These wind out. You'll only get so much adjustment before you realise that you might need a set of wheel spacers to take the wheel further away from the hub. Depends what tyres you've got. Don't forget to do up the lock nut after you've finished adjusting them. It might take a couple of attempts to get this right. If you have the wheels off the ground, what I usually do is see that I can get my hand through the space between the radius arm and the tyre and turning it the other way, checking on the same side. Don't forget, once the vehicle is on the ground, the weight will be on the tyres and the tyres will flex a little bit. You've got to remember this, so it might take a couple of attempts to get it right. Okay, that's about the width of my hand there. And it worked out all right on a road test, so all good. Right, for those people who are fairly novice to Land Rovers, I'm going to show you a little trick with a bar. Getting your wheel back on again, it's quite easy. These are quite big wheels and the axle stands are quite high, but this is a lovely little truck fitter's trick. You can either use one or two bars and get underneath the tyre so you can lift it up. Once you're underneath, you have a little bit more control. Instead of straining yourself, you can then line up the wheel and your wheel nuts like this, hold it with a bar and put a wheel nut on. Okay, that's hanging on the studs now. So one wheel nut will hold the wheel in place while you get your other wheel nuts in your hand and then screw them on. You also have your feet to steady the wheel as required.